All right. I'm back. I'm gonna let this real fast as everything froze real fast. I'm gonna close some of these things and talk about this history.
Turkey, country at the crossroads of Europe and Asia. Turkey has a population of 82 million people, and from these, just a few thousand identify themselves as Greek. Being situated in Asia Minor, also known as Anatolia, the territory of present-day Turkey witnessed many transitions throughout its known history. The region was populated by some different ancient populations. One of them was the Greeks. Ancient Greek people settled on the west coast since the 20th century BC. The father of history, Herodotus, described Anatolia as a territory divided into regions. These regions were diverse in culture, language, and religious practice. But in the next hundreds of years, Greek culture and influence became stronger and stronger, especially at the peak of the Byzantine Empire during the 6th to 10th centuries. The Greeks were the majority in today's Anatolia. But what happened to them? We are happy to say that this episode is brought to you by our sponsor, Final Fantasy XV: A New Empire. You can use my link below to download Final. Start of the Greek collapse in the region starts with the 11th century. Following the Battle of Manzikert in 1071, the Seljuk Turks swept through all of Asia Minor, while the Byzantines would recover western and northern Anatolia in subsequent years. Central Asia Minor was settled by Turkic peoples and never again came under Byzantine rule. This led in the end to their collapse, mainly due to their internal problems, civil wars, and other invasions. Because of poor management.
So what's interesting is when I was younger in the scriptures and learning this stuff, it's fun. It's nice learning all the spiritual things and everything. But when you start getting onto history, right? When we start talking about history, because there are some scriptures that do talk about history. When you start getting on history and you start figure out who these people are, it gets really interesting when the clarity is actually there. Speaking of which, the Seljuk Turks, right? Now, what's interesting is when we think of the Ottoman, a lot of people they would start to try to say the Ottoman was actually Islam, right? In fact, I thought that because a lot of people that's what they said. They said Islam, Ottomans. But once you start doing some history on genetics and you start finding out about this Turkish invasion and the Turkification of the Middle East, you find out some really interesting stuff that I think is very important to take note of. For example, we know that when Rome fell, it actually fell to what was called the Ottoman Empire. Now they was going at it against the Islam, right? We know that they was going against the Arabs and everything and all that. But who actually took them over was not actually the Arabs. A group came in here, which were actually the Seljuk Turks. The Seljuk Turks of the Ottoman Empire came down here and they actually converted to Islam. They converted the original ones, the original Arabs. They end up getting the Seljuk Turks to convert to Islam, and then they came and they took all this, and they actually pushed the Arabs downward, and they came here and they took all of this, and then they took Constantinople, which was the capital, and that's why they call themselves the Ottoman Empire, which were actually just Turks, a group of Turks. They actually call themselves the Ottoman Empire from when the man called Ottoman and whatnot. But they end up taking all these areas, and they actually end up pushing the original Arab caliphate and their conquests pushed them downwards. And that's why you see Persia, which is Iran, extremely mixed with the J of the Turks. And we can trace the J all the way to the Turks from the same. And one of the biggest things, which is really silly, a lot of people when they think of Jews and Arabs, they'll say that they have J in them. But the problem with that is that they have the same subclad. They're the same subclad. That would mean they wouldn't be a branch of a branch from a different branch. They would actually be the same. They actually are the same. And the best way to explain that is just they're the same. This It's no other way to go about it. Like there's a lot of people that think there's Jews versus Arabs, but rather it's just Turks. That's actually what they are genetically. A lot of Turks in the land of the Middle East, and that's genetically proven. That's a genetic fact. That a lot of the Arabs were actually pushed downwards, and the original Israelites were sent over here into the land of Spain. Even the ones that were some that was in this area and some was in this area, they was all sent to Spain. And then what happened was, it's recorded that some went around this area and stayed over here, most of them went downwards into Africa. A lot of them went downwards to Africa and then was shipped into San Tome and Principe, and then they were also shipped into Brazil, shipped into the New Indies, and that's actually the truth of the slave trade. Few people actually know that it actually is that deep, that the people actually started to change the images of who peoples were. And that's actually important to understand. That's why we look at genetics, because genetics tell you the truth of what they are, because you can change your tradition, you can change your belief, you can change a lot of things, but you cannot change your genetics. You cannot change your genetics. So a male line is always going to be a male line of no matter what they are. So it was really interesting, seeing the Turks come in and settle in these areas, and which you're going to see right here too. You're seeing all that happen.
The Byzantine Empire was unable to stem the Turkic advance, and by 1300, most of Asia Minor was ruled by Anatolian beyliks. Beginning in the 11th century, war between the Turks and the Byzantines led to the deaths of many in Asia Minor, while others were enslaved. Areas in central Anatolia became depopulated, and due to this reason, Turkic nomads moved in. A number of pastoralists of Turkic origin that migrated to Anatolia is a matter of discussion. According to Ibn Said al-Marabi, there were 200,000 Turkmen tents in Denizli and its surrounding areas, 30,000 in Bolu and its environment, and about 100,000 in Kastamonu and its environment. According to a Latin source, at the end of the 12th century, there were 100,000 nomadic tents in the regions of Denizli and Isparta. During the Ottoman era, a period of Turkification started. Until the late 17th century, a blood tax existed. This was chiefly an annual practice by which the Ottoman Empire sent...
All right, so this is actually the part I wanted to show real fast. The reason why is because when we think of the Arabs and what happened to them, we actually got to find out the history of the Turks and what did the Turks do with them. And the Turks actually took the Arabs and forced them downwards and took some and brought them up into Greece. And that's why we're going to see that E1B1B, close that. And that's why we're going to see that E1B1B up there in the area of Greece. Just go up a little bit here, or make sure if it's up or down. Because like I was saying, the Arabs are actually right down here. The Arabs are actually down here because they were moved out of these areas. We'll go up here. And that's why history comes into play. History comes into the play when you also look at these genetics. History comes into play. Let me see right here. And we can see the after effect of it just by looking at that. You see that red and white right there, all the red and white stripes and all that. Those are going to be your Japhetic from the Turks. So that's going to actually be from the Turks that we look at there. I'm just go up here. And we know that because we already confirmed that genetically, we've seen it ourselves, and we got other geneticists that also verify that. I'm just go down here. And I'm going to go to right here. Okay, so the Turks came in. So when the Turks came in, they came downwards. Right? They came downwards. Let me see if I can open a map here. I wanted to open up a map for a little bit. In fact, close that. I like to have maps open because I think maps really tell a story very interestingly. When you get a little history and you get the genetics and the maps, so you can follow the genetics, follow the history, and follow the locations that's set on the maps, which really brings harmony to truth. So the Turks is genetically proven that their genetics are actually over here, and this is like a little gap right here, right? You're gonna have India. So there's actually a separation here. So there's a way up here where you're actually gonna have your Turks over here, and you're gonna have your Mongols, which actually push the Turks. These were actually pushing the Turks, and they came downwards this way. Some of them came up here, and we know because they hit them hard. They hit Rome hard. They hit them here. They hit them here. They went all the way down here. They swift around. They came up down over here. and actually some of their genetics were here before in Carthage, and that's actually what we know, that the Philistines and Phoenicia and the Philistines right here, and the area of Phoenicians where we have Sidon, that actually has mixtures of those of north. Those of the north came down and settled in these areas, which they would have came over here too and settled in these areas. So we actually have some genetic evidence that they came over here. That's why you can see some of the traces of the Turkish names and everything in these areas. But there's a separation, right? There's a border separation, right? There's like no population on top of this little area. You're gonna have your Indians down here, and you have a separation of China over here, right? China and the islands and everything over here. So you're gonna have a little separation. So they came and they pushed the Turks down. The Turks came downwards, and this was actually when the Muslims were going at it with the obviously the Persians, right? They were fighting with the Persians. The Muslims and the Persians were fighting, and the Romans were here too. So the Romans, the Persians, and the Muslims, they were all going at it. But then Turk came in, right? The Turks came in, the Seljuk Turks, and then boom, they pushed into. They easily breezed past the Persians. They got to the Romans, and they were going at it with the Romans and the Ottomans. So they were pushing. They took the. In fact, they took the king, the chief in the land of Saudi Arabia. They circled around and they basically took it over, and they established themselves on the throne and made them marry them, made them marry. So the Turks and the original Arabs married each other, and we see that a lot with the E1B1B and the J constantly together. And you'll see that later on, when the Turks ruled this area, they took some of the Arabs, which you're going to see in this video, is going to tell you about it. They're going to move the Arabs up here, and we're going to see that evidence of the genetics of the Arabs, right? E1B1B, not E1B1A, but E1B1B we find in this area. It's important to understand that the difference between E1B1A, E1B1B, this is going to be clear evidence for this group being brought up here, and a large portion of them, because we're going to see a large portion of them that's historically recorded, them being taken here, brought up here, and we can find the genetics also. So let's actually see that history and see that.
The military to press second or third sons of their Christian subjects in the villages of the Balkans into military training as Janissaries. Afterwards, they were then converted to Islam. Janissaries in the Ottoman army were largely of Christian origin. Attacks existed. This was chiefly an annual practice by which the Ottoman Empire, a period of Turkification, started. Until the late 17th century, a blood tax existed. This was chiefly an annual practice by which the Ottoman Empire sent the military to press second or third sons of their Christian subjects in the villages of the Balkans into military training as Janissaries.
So now, what's very important to know is that when you think Muslim, when you think Muslim, don't always just think Arab. Not every Arab is a Muslim. Not every Muslim is an Arab. It's very important to understand. It's like a religion. It's like a religion. Not everyone's gonna be the same. It's kind of like if you was to go to other religions, right? You see other religions in different places, in China or stuff like that, right? Or we see places where people are mainly Buddhists. Not every person who is in that religious or in that ethnic group is actually going to have the same religion, right? That's also important to understand. It's actually recorded that a lot of Ishmaelites were Christians. A lot of Ishmaelites were actually Christians. A lot of people in that area actually became Christian. Even there was a time of they was living in Egypt, and a lot of them converted to Christ. A lot of them converted to Christ. They were killed. A lot of them were killed, but a lot of them did convert to Christ. So that's what happened. And notice this area is under their control, right? Some of them are going to be Muslims, but not all of them are Muslim. Not everyone wanted to convert to the belief of Muslim, right? And that's actually important to know, because in this area here, this is where we're going to have a lot of those Arabs, and a lot of them in the area of the Ottomans that they controlled became up here, and they converted to, and that's why you see so many Arabs Muslim. That's why you see so many Arabs Muslim, because a lot of them actually converted to Muslim by jihad, what they call jihad, by the force of the sword, by using different tactics. So their army was actually taking sons of people, like their third son or their sons, and they were bringing them up in here, right? And let's look at the genetics here. Let's see, what do we see here? Do we see a diverse people here? Because remember, they were taking Christians. They didn't care what you were. They want to take, and that's actually what we see. If we look at the genetics in that area, let's just look at it. Let's go over here. All right, they came down there. And if you look at the genetics in that area, mainly in this area of Greece, we notice we can see some R's, we can see some J's, some I's, but we got a very interesting lineage here. EM78. EM78, these are going to be your line of Ishmael, right? This is going to be your line of Ishmael. So we had Arabs up there. We had Arabs move up there and settle up there. Let's actually look at that in a note. So we was noting that, as other geneticists was noting, the clash of the J and the E1B1B lineages, very often these clashes were happening. And they show evidence of the Islamic conquest. That's what they show. They show evidence of the Islamic conquest. So here's that lineage. Let's just look here. Right there, you can see this one. So it's going to be right there, M2 115. It goes down and we go from M35. M35 is going to bring us M7 8, right? M78. And we can look at that again going back over here. We can see M78. So we can see this is actually going to be an E1B1B branch. So that's really interesting to see. Now, it's always the same, right? It's not a mix. You never really see E1B1A up here, but you see E1B1B up here, which is very interesting to see. Now, notice it's not in these areas, right? It's not in these areas that much, but it's highly in these areas. It's a larger portion, especially this area right here. You can see a larger, in fact, it's the largest grouping here. E1, this E lineage is the largest grouping in Greece. How did they get in Greece? The history tells us that the Arabs were brought up there and brought into Greece. So you can see this area right here in Greece, large portion of E, right? E1B1B, that's actually up there. Very interesting to see, right? You're gonna have some Turkish lineages there and different ones there. That's very important, right? So you can see these different things going on here. So we see evidence, history, and evidence. This right here is evidence of history. This is evidence of the the movements of biblical characters during history. Let's go and look at the E lineage. Let's look a little more details on the E lineage. We'll move this over here so it's closer to here. So remember, this is going to be, remember from here, you're going to work your way down. And then at P177, that's when you're going to open up and that's going to get your branches for your E1B1A lineages where it says 777. And then you have your E1B1B lineages. So it's going to have E1B1B, and that's going to be really interesting to take note of. That lineage is going to bring us certain lineages. That's really interesting. How did the 777? That's like one of my favorite numbers. So right here, you can open it up. So remember, it's from M35, and then we just opened up. So M right there, that's going to be the lineage of those that's found in Greece. This lineage right here. So it's not that long, not a big lineage. You can see here, it opens up some more branches, some other sub branches and everything. Just looking at it. So you can see it's got a lot of subclades, right? Got a little bit of some subclades there. All those underneath one branch right here. You can see. Let's go back and close this. So right there, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, right? You can see he's going to bring forth 12 sons, right? From M2 is going to bring forth 12 lines, and that's noted by geneticists. Geneticists even note that from M2 brings forth 12 lines. Very interesting that we actually see these things right here. Very interesting to see these things on there, and to match the genetics, right? To match the genetics with the history, right? Let's see the rest of that history. So remember, anyone in their territory that they own, which is also over here, few people know, is also they also have all of Saudi Arabia, because we already went through that history. We went through the history on how they also took Saudi Arabia, how they pushed the original people out of there. And remember, these are going to be your Turks. They're going to have your J. And remember, we can also verify what they are by looking at certain Turks, the Turkish lineage, and different things like that. They all have the same, because the Turk branch, if you look at the Turkish branch, right, let's look at the J lineage underneath CF. Let's go down to J right here, and let's look at J. Let's take a look at J. So here's J. Just open it up a little bit. So it's going to have some different branches, some different types and everything, right? You got some different branches. The only interesting thing is that a lot of them are under the same branch. A lot of them are actually under the same branch. A very similar branch, which is this one right here. This JM267. You also find them this is J1 and J2. So you can see those two different ones, J1 and J2, right? And then you'll see those different ones underneath them and everything. So you'll see a different lineages from these ones. But these are going to be your main ones. They're going to always connect to either J1 or J2 of one of these ones. So we also noted that when we was looking at them, because you got to look at both of them, J1 and J2, to get a good understanding if they're found, and they're usually always found the same groups. They're usually always found the same groups. That's why I made a thing when I actually started examining this. I noticed that the same grouping was usually always together. That they're always a mingled company, and you can usually tell where they move because you can see, right? We looked at the Turks that had that large J, right? We looked at the Turks in Turkey. We had did some comparisons with different ones. Look at those J's and everything. Really interesting, right? Really interesting with some of these things. This one talks about where the Turks settled at, right? They all mingled. The Armenians, right? The Kurds, the Greeks, right? They all mingled together. We see evidence of that when we look at those things and whatnot. But I just wanted to go down a little bit just to get a little clarity on one of these J's right here, which is right here. Remember, we had looked at the how you say the uh, Turkish people, right? The Avars, the Durgans, and whatnot, all these whatnot. And we noticed that they always had this same line in them, right? The so-called line that was of the high priest, but this is not a high priest line. P58, these are actually in Turks. There's actually a lineage that's as 44 to 99% in the Turks. 44 to 99% in the Turks, the J lineage is actually found highly in the Turks. And in that so-called high priest line, right? You can look it up, P58, the C MH lineage that's supposed to be the high priest line, which we know is not the high priest line. It's just a Turkish lineage. But you can see very, very interesting to see that history. You can see this is actually going to be where the Arabs, that E1B1B was moved up here. But let's see a little more in his history on that.
Afterwards, they were then converted to Islam. Janissaries in the Ottoman army were largely of Christian origin. The Muslims had more privileges than the Christians in the empire, and this led to many conversions to Islam and also led to integration into the Turkish ethnicity in time. The late Ottoman government sought to create a core identity with a single Turkish religion, language, history, and tradition. The Ottoman Empire had an ethnically diverse population that included Turks, Arabs, Albanians, Bosniaks, Greeks, Persians, Bulgarians, Serbs, Armenians, and others. During the late 19th century and the beginning of the 20th century, the policy of Turkification received several new layers, and it was sought to impose Turkish in the administration. This affected the non-Turkish people, especially the Arabs, Armenians, Kurds, and Greeks. Even after those centuries under the Ottoman Empire, inside Anatolia existed a large community of Greeks, especially around the western coasts and in Istanbul. Before World War I, there was an estimated 1.8 to 2 million Greeks living inside the Ottoman Empire. Before World War I, there was an estimated 1.8 to 2 million Greeks living in the Ottoman Empire. From 1914 until 1923, Greeks in Thrace and Asia Minor were subjects to a campaign including massacres and internal deportations. Around 1.5 million Ottoman Greeks remained in the Ottoman Empire after losses of 550,000 during the First World War. Almost all, 1.25 million, except for those in Constantinople, had fled before or were forced to go to Greece in 1923 in the population exchanges mandated by the League of Nations after the Greco-Turkish War, 1919 to 1922. The lingual Turkification of Greek, Armenian, and Assyrian speakers in 19th century Anatolia is a result of partial Turkification that occurred earlier. Emigrate. During the Second World War, there was a tax that was supposed to be paid by 100 by 2012.
All right, so basically, when you think about the land of Turkey, if you look at the history behind it, these are going to be the most isolated Turks, right? These are going to be the most isolated Turks, which we also noted when looking at the history and everything. right? When following the history. Now we knew the history, but we didn't also know the genetics of these ones. But now we know the genetics. So you can see they would have took this area, right? When they took Constantinople, they grew, right? They took all these areas and whatnot. It's also important to know they owned a lot of this area. They actually got a lot of this area, owned this area. When they moved, they pushed the Arabs out of this area. But some of them kept fighting. They obviously they held their ground for a long time. In fact, a lot of this area they owned. A lot of Arabs owned a lot of this area over here, and they own portions of these areas around these areas. So they had good portions of these areas. They were still fighting with these Ottomans for a long time. Remember, these were the Turks that came down, right? The Seljuk Turks that came from around this area, right? Geographic location, right? Right here, far eastward of what you will say, you could say some people say east of Europe, right? This is actually, they'll say, when they say Europe, like ancient Europe, they'll say all this would be it, right? They'll say eastward of it on the east side over here, right? And then when you think Asia, right, this was Asia right here. This middle portion would be Asia. And then this part right here would be Europe, right? A lot of historians like Flavio Josephus, when they talk about Asia and Europe, this would be Asia, right? This would be the province of Asia. And then you have Europe, which will be upper up here. But today, we have different areas. Now we know you have like little areas like here. But back then, all this up here was it. And then this will be Asia, right? And so they would have came from the middle of Asia and east of Europe, which is far over here, and they would have came downwards, and they would have came upwards, right? They would have came upwards. They would have hit over here and hit here. They would have hit this, and they would have took some of this. They were hitting them hard, and they were going downwards. And they also took these. They were large people, very massive, massive amount of them that came down. And we find traces of them that sometimes they will also come down at different times. But this time, with the Mongols chasing them, it was hordes. That's why they called them barbarians, because they didn't know who they were at that time. This whole world was isolated from them, right? They were separated from them. They had their own world going on for a long time. And all of a sudden, boom, these people that was wild people came down and destroyed them, right? In the Bible, it talks about the Scythians. It talks about some of these groups and different groups like that. This is actually not the Scythians, but this is going to be a different group, right? The Scythians actually, the history of the Scythians, they got the R lineage, and they actually swept over here too. We actually have evidence of the Scythians being in China. We have evidence of them coming into China. For example, really deep history that not a lot of people actually know on China, on a lot of things like that. Go down a little bit or up. There's a group here that has an R lineage, right? It's not often that China has that. They usually have O's and N's and C's and Q's and things like that, right? K and N, things like that of chord, right? You can see right here, this is what it would look like older, right? You got your O's, N's, C's, Q's, but then you get this R creeping, which is really interesting because this R right here, it's not familiar to this area, but it does come in and it settles there. And what's interesting is when you look at this people, it says right here, it's a very interesting little thing. I have this little bookmark here and whatnot, but I'm gonna talk about these people real fast. It says one of the more interesting finds is that although the centuries lies in China, or cemeteries lies in China, the corpse have strong European features. Right? It lets us know these corpse that's these cemeteries that they found in China, which is really interesting. You should see what the cemetery looks like. I'm gonna show you real fast. I just stumbled across this real fast when I was just studying a few things. This is one of the cemeteries. There's a cemetery they found there. You can see there. Very interesting. It's in the desert. It's right in the desert. And wait till you see the genetics of these individuals. So they found this cemetery, just a cemetery sitting there in the desert with these pikes sticking out. So remember, the world's a large place. So, if they're just in a little isolated place in the desert. In fact, apparently they was here and the water dried up. That's why they died. They all died because they was in the middle of nowhere and the water around them, it all dried up and they pretty much died in their place. We'll go over here. You can see right here what it says right here. They said he had a strong European look. They talk about how they had brown hair, long nose, right? And genetically analyzed and everything. And the lineage that they had was an R lineage, which was very interesting because our lineage is actually a European lineage, more closer to Europe than anywhere else. It's also found in different groups and stuff like that. But This one was really interesting to find over there, and I find that interesting. I find that fascinating when people are moving around and mingling and stuff like that to find out what happened. Why did they mingle? Like what was these things, right? We talked about this, the D in Japan, right? They had more of that D lineage and everything, which is connected with the E lineage, and then you have these other lineages, right? O, Q, C, right? These are gonna be more Japhetic, right? Your Mongols, right? Those are the ones that push the J lineage out. So you see the Mongols right there and everything. Really interesting to see. So you can see some of those things. We don't see a lot of J over here. We don't see a lot of J, but we do have some evidence of that J in those areas. We do have evidence of J in the areas, but as after the move that they made in that area. Go over here. So the Turks, you can find a lot of that J in them. Is not even it's no doubt of those things. Like for example, this group has a large portion of that P58. That P58 lineage is actually highly over here in the Caucasus Mountains, and a lot of other J's in these areas. Right, red right here. That's gonna be your right here. Red and blue. Red and blue is gonna be your J lineages of the Turks. You can find those up there. Very interesting how they were settled in that area. Very very interesting. Go up here a little bit. So I find it interesting, finding the migration of these people and everything of different groups, and just connecting these R's and J's and everything, so we can see the real picture, the story of the Bible, as it should be told, right? And these things are really interesting because when you think of the Canaanites, the Philistines, you think of one people, but they're actually mingled groups. They're actually mingled groups of people that they find in ancient times and they find still modern. Most of these groups mixed. And what makes it interesting is the way you find Israel. To know that it's Israel, they'll be mainly pure. You find a mainly pure group. That's how you can actually find Israel. So some really interesting stuff, and that actually explains why that major J is in the Middle East, because of the Turkification. They call it Turkification. These are the Arabs, the E1B1B. These are your real Arabs. These lineage right here is your real Arabs. You're always gonna find them in the Middle East. There's something you're gonna happen. That's gonna happen there, right? Your E1B1B, your E1B1A is actually gonna be moved out of there, right? They were actually taken into captivity into every nation. They were moved out of that area. So you're gonna have some R's, right? Some R's came down there with R's, right? That's gonna be close to the Scythian. You got a lot of that that's gonna move down there, and your J is gonna be closer to those that were pushed by the Mongols. That's gonna be a mix into a group. So it's really interesting looking at these things. I think it's very interesting looking at these things. You never know what you'll find. You'll find some very interesting stuff that at first you may not believe, but then studying it a little deeper, you consider it. You consider it because then it changes a little bit of perspective of the world we live in, even of the Bible. Right? We know that the Bible is telling the truth. We know a lot of things that it is talking about is coming to pass and happening. We know a lot of those things are actually happening. So it's really interesting looking at these things. I think. Let me go back to the family tree. So you see that we just looked at the E. So you can see right here, this is going to be your E1B1B. This is going to be your Ishmaelites. That's going to be your line of Ishmael. This is going to be your line of Ishmael, Isaac, Isaac, Ishmael, right? Ishmael, Isaac, right? That's actually what you're going to have there. So you can open up this, right? It's going to be a Jacob, and it's going to have all your 12 tribes down there. So, and that's where you're going to get your E1, B1, whatever it is following afterwards after that, right? It's a lot of different types of ones and then letters that's afterwards. Sometimes E1B1A and E1B1 or E1B1A1A or E1B1A1B or E1B1A1C, stuff like that. And you can see right here, this is going to be your E1B1B. So these are going to be your real Arabs, the real Arabs. Really, really interesting to see that deep history with that one right there. Now let's look at a different lineage. Let's go to let's look at a different lineage. Let's go to matter of fact, I'll let that be. I think we did a little bit for now. I think we did a nice little search for the J and the E real fast. So it's gonna be your. Let's see if we can find 52. I mean 58. Let's see if we can find P58. I'm gonna see if I can find that thing. Branch name. It never takes me to it. Let's see. I want to go down. I want to open it up and find it here. I know it's underneath this. At least it should be, unless it has a different name. All right, let's see. This is how we can find it. I'm gonna close this and I'm gonna go up here. So now the J lineage, P J dash P58. So J dash P58 is of M267. And I would like to see how it branches, but I'm gonna show you the reason why we're looking at 58 the most, and that's why I was mostly searching up to see if it was actually Israel, because they do say that that was a so-called Jewish line, but it's not. That's that one that they find in different groups, that J lineage, that P58, and they say is actually Judean. It's not. It's absolutely not. We find that a lot in the Turks. That's a Turkish lineage. Put over here, because remember, Israel have a private lineage, not no one else's lineage, because remember, the sons is always to the sons, to the sons, to the sons. Anyone else, like we've seen some crazy ideas where people try to say it's through the mother. That's super false. And if they try to use that idea from Ezra's, they don't really know what it's saying in the book of Ezra's. That's this part where supposedly one of the priests didn't have any proof to show that he was actually a priest. It never said, well, he doesn't have any proof. No one has any proof. Then everyone's just going to be going off the mother's line. That's super false. But rather, he said, you can't be a priest. That's what they said. He can't be a priest. That means that it has to be by the father's line. It wasn't saying that they're going to bend the rules, because they can't bend the rules. It's the law. They have to go by the father's line. Let me see. CMH. It has to always go by the father's line. Let's see. Or CHM. All right, let me see. So you can see that P58, whatnot. I'm looking for a one from Wiki. In fact, let's just cut it and go to Google. Just put that extra thing there right here. And let's look at this. I just want to see if it'll show me the branch. Right? You see all that? You see the traces there and whatnot? You see some that settled here. You can see how they went down in all these different areas, right? That's gonna be your Turkish havoc. That's gonna be your Turkish branches, right? You find a lot in different areas. You find the percentage in different areas and whatnot. I just want to find the branch. I want to find how the tree goes. This looks promising. See 58. Okay, I'm not sure how it breaks. Just seeing here, unless it has another name. Just looking how that breaks. Otherwise, there's another way. Let's try this. All right. Just seeing if it has a different name. L J1A L22 L22 L202 L222. Let's see. I don't think these are named like that. All right. Just taking a look here. I'm going to see if there's in any one of these other branches. All right, all right. Looks to me that it could be underneath one of these ones. I just want to look. There it is. There it is right there. Okay, so I can close these ones. I just want to make it a clean jump to. I want to see a clean jump to 58. This one right here. Let's close this. And let's close. Okay. That's fine. This works. All right, so that's now is a clear jump to. So from there, it's going downwards, 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 and then P58. And the reason why I'm looking at P58 is because P58 is supposedly supposed to be the high priest line. That's what it's supposed to be. But we find that in multiple different Turks, like the direct P58. We find the direct P58 in the Turks. So that's the reason why I wanted to look at that real fast, just to see how it breaks. So I never actually opened to see how it breaks to see that from here. I knew it came from 267 though, but I want to see how many are actually going to be there. So that's actually interesting to see because that makes it clear that yes, these are going to be a branch of the Turks. These are going to be a branch of the Turks. That's going to give us that clear understanding. And which we seen it ourselves. We looked directly at that P58 and those certain branches and different things like that, and we know that that's gonna be clearly connected to the Turks, without a doubt. Even looking at the history of them and whatnot. So that's why we had took a look at that. So we know that that's gonna be highly in the Avars and certain groups that we clearly know as Turks, right? Avars and whatnot, right? 44 to 99% in these Turks. Very interesting to see. Very interesting to see because it does make it makes clarity to the story. That's what it does. It really brings understanding to what was going on. That these groups were actually mingled groups that end up settling here, and we know because we can look directly at the Turkish DNA, which is highly J, which is mainly J. So that's what we see that the Turks mainly had was a high J. That's what they had, and that's why I made that little picture with all those groups together so we can see that right here. So you can see those J's in certain groups here that really paints the scriptures, what the scriptures is talking about, and what the world history is actually showing us. So genetics really paints the understanding of what we are seeing. So we can see those things in those areas, which is really interesting. So high J's in the land of Turkey. So you can see some high J's, some J's there and J's there, and different ones in all these lands of Turks, right? Iran Turks and everything. J2, J1 right here. So very interesting to get these things to see. And obviously, it's important to know how do we know J is Turk because like process of elimination, you got to know who's who and what's who, and even look at what geneticists say and get the understanding of these things. Even look at history, and then history is gonna put it all together, gonna put it all into what it should be in its conclusion. So it's very interesting, especially looking at the Philistines, how they get there, right? The genetics of them. It's very interesting to see how complex. It's not just a black and white picture. It's completely mingled. It's mixed. There's a lot of mingled groups in certain areas, right? Even when Israel left, they was a mingled company, right? It was Egyptians mixed with Israel, right? We know that Ephraim and Manasseh, they had Hamite DNA. We know that when we think about Moses, he got with a Hamite. We know that uh, Judah at one point got with an original Canaanite, right? We know that a lot of these things were happening there. So Israel will have a lot of similarities with him. That's be something that we will find in the female DNA. We should be able to find a lot of L's in Israel, which is a giveaway when we don't find that. Is a big giveaway if we don't find any L lineages because we know that they mix with him. So, we just know that happened. That was in the female's line though. The male's line is going to be what it is. So that's why I looked at this because I wanted to see. So that's interesting. I'll leave that there because I think that's really interesting to see these two things. So I'm gonna do some screenshots and save some of these things. I think that's really interesting to see with the branches and everything. Really, really interesting. So I just wanted to do that. I just wanted to check out some of these branches, open up some of these branches, and look at these things and whatnot. Right? Look at these graveyards because you never know who someone is. You never know. Genetics really opens up the door for who people are. It really opens up the door to history that, when you first look at someone, you may think they're something, but you never know what they are. Like, for example, these people, right? The Chadic people, really interesting people. I had showed them before. I think these people are very fascinating. The reason why is because these are in Africa, right? These are in Africa, but they're not actually native to Africa. They're actually going to have the haplogroup R. These group are going to have the haplogroup R as a lot of the European. They actually have the haplogroup R mainly, just like a lot of the European. You can see a little bit there. This is actually going to be R that goes down there. Really interesting. You can see right here. This is what they are. R B88. B88 is what they are right here. So they actually break, and they are actually B88. This group. I find it very interesting. When you find stuff like that really paints an interesting picture of reality. I think it really paints a really interesting picture of reality.
People tend to forget that Nigeria is a big country, being 1.5 times larger than Texas or larger than France and Germany combined. And if you're someone who thinks that Nigeria is some backwards, obscure country, it's actually predicted that Nigeria's population will surpass that of the United States in 50 years. And by this time, 2068, Nigeria's total economy will be somewhere in the upper trillions, at around the same level India's economy is right now in terms of total output, despite being a far smaller country. When Nigeria was established as a territory of the British, even the European colonial rulers recognized the challenges in administrating such a Goliath of a country, especially when considering the vast array of differences between their two main regions. Even more so pronounced than almost any other country, Nigeria is a country divided in almost every degree imaginable. Southern Nigeria is majority Christian, and the languages spoken here are actually closer to Arabic than their linguistic neighbors right beneath them. And perhaps most perplexing of all, also.
Now, I find it interesting because they can easily be some of the original people that was in what's that word, in Egypt. These could have been the original
In
ones
a
in the land
different
of Egypt. And the reason why I say that is because we actually know that some of the ancient leaders of Egypt actually have lineages of R, and these are going to be a dark skinned group. And some of the people in Egypt have the R lineage. Some of the people also have E1B1 B2 though. Some of them have E1B1B, but you can also see lineage of R in Egypt, which is really interesting when you look at these people that are mainly R lineages, right? And they're going to have Hamites with them too, right? You can see the A lineage, that's going to be Ham, right? B's Ham as well. And they're going to have some J lineages, which is going to be some Turks down there. So some Turks end up getting in their group a little bit. So it's really interesting to see that. So you can see some obviously other groups in there, different groups in those areas, but they're mainly going to be R, and they look the way they look.
haplogroups native to sub-Saharan Africa.
Right? They look the way they look. It's one of those things that, at first glance, when you first look at them, you're going to think they're the same people. But that's the thing about Africa. You never know how someone actually is. These are going to be our lineages that they have, right? It's very interesting. When you see them, they're just in this little area, this little area right here. You can see them at, and that's what they have. They have those R lineages, and they're down there in that area. So I thought it was really interesting when I seen that, to find something that what's the word I'm looking for? Controversial. I think that's controversial because they're basically going to be Japhetic, but they're actually found in the land of Ham. So very interesting to see that. I thought that was really interesting. So things like that, complex things like that, like genetics and who peoples are, I think it's very interesting to look into. So this history of the Ottoman Empire, knowing that they were the Turks and what they did when they came into these areas, how they took these areas and everything from the Arabs and they pushed them downwards, and then they went over here and they moved some of the Arabs into this area. Right, we can see that a lot of Arabs and different groups was in this area when we look at the genetics. I'm really interested to see that. I was wondering why, because I used to notice that a lot of E lineages in this area. I noticed a lot of E lineages in a lot of Europeans, and I was like, why is that? How they, this E1B1B, why is it so mixed in these groups? And then learning about how the Turks actually took some of their people and moved them up here, some of the people that they ruled over their area, and they moved them over here, and they did a thing called Turkification, which is basically alterizing a lot of stuff the way they want it to be, and they end up settling here in Turkey. And that's why we looked at some of the genetics there, and we can tell who they are because that J, that major J of them, that's there. Very important to know, right? Because you got to ask somebody, who are the Turks? If you ask them what genetic is Turkey, ask them. Ask them what genetics is Turkey, and they're gonna have to show you what genetics is Turkey. And we know geneticists all agree that J, Haplogroup J, is Turks. We know because we can follow it all the way to the land that they came from, which is over here. We can follow the J lineage all the way over here, in the distance over here where the Turkish names are. So we can follow the J lineage all the way over there. And that's why we made that video E versus J, just so you can see in comparison fairly with these things genetically. So really interesting to see, really, really interesting stuff. I think a lot of this history is important to know. A lot of these things are important to see. So just wanted to take a day to just open up some hablo groups, and then just examine these things just to see. Thought it was really interesting taking a look at those things. Right, P58, the so-called Kohan, right? Kohen. Let me just go to that real fast. CMH, right there, Hablo group. Right? They say that this is that's what they say. That's what they say. They say is the line of, just looking at those branches and everything. They say is the line of Aaron. That's what they try to say, right? That's why they say the Kohan, right? That's not it. It's very important to understand that. All right, you can see, however, it talks about right here, the CMH is found within JM267, J1 on the Y chromosome ancestral tree. Haplogroup JM267 is commonly referred to, they call it a Semitic line, right, or Mediterranean, because it's elevated frequencies in that area. However, Haplogroup J M267 highest frequencies and greatest diversity is in Iraq and in the Zagros mountain range found in western Iran, right? That's why I showed you that in the area of Iran, because Iran, that's where they actually came from, right? Iran, right? Iraq, Iran, this is actually where they came from. They have higher percentage of J that lead up here. These up here is actually where we find OJ in the area of the Persians. It's actually where we find it. It's very important to understand that these people came down there, right? Let me just go to something here. All right, and we can follow their history because they were recorded by China. There was a group over there that was over there dealing with China and stuff, and got pushed back. Just go down a little bit. Right here, that's that research right there. Right, we can look at the J's. You can see right here, these are actually where the Turks came from. So you see that J, this is gonna be so these stripes right here, these color stripes. So this black and white one, this white one and red one, this red one, right? This black and red one. These polka dot ones right here, those are gonna be all the same. And this is gonna be the one of Turkey. So you can see, well, not Turkey, but this is Iran. But looking at the whole area, it's better to look at the whole area. So you can see right here, these J's right here, these J lineages, and we see massive portions here, great massive portions over here. Really interesting to see that. Obviously, you get some R's, the greens being the R's and whatnot. Those are just things that are going to happen. You're going to see that. All right, it's got some Q's there. Some Q's over here. So R, these are going to be some J's, massive J's over here. Now, it's important to understand this is Iran. Iran was also with Mahdia, right? Mahdia, that's going to be Japheth, right? Japheth was over here in Mahdia, right? And you had a little pocket over here where Persians were, but obviously Media being a larger portion, that's going to overflow over the Persians. Also, we can follow that J all the way up here, coming from this way, and settle in these areas. So they settle here, settle here. We see J's all in these areas, all the way down here. So it's high portions over here. So they try to say it was high over here, but no, it's actually high in the Zagros over here in the Zagros Mountains and upper north. So it's actually higher up in these areas, in this area of Iran and Iraq. So you can see that's actually where we find a lot of J's, a lot of J lineages in those areas. Really interesting when looking at. So you can see a few things of that. Now, obviously, they would say different things. They would say that that would be right if you do not have a oral tradition of being Kohen or of being Jewish, then your Y chromosome is still part of that thing, right? Your deepest ancestors, they would say, would be some farmers in that land and whatnot, and they'll say it was like 9,000 years ago and whatnot. And then they would talk about that. They try to connect it with Aaron, right? They try to say that it brings them to the line of Aaron. It says, while not being directly this one, keep in mind that while the CMH was the most frequent, right, haplogroup found in, they say, Kohanim men, it was not the only group. So obviously not the only group because they're mingled company. They're a mingled company, and then they talk about how they try to say this is going to be the high priest line, and that's why we looked at that. We looked at to see if this is the high priest line. We want to make sure this is only in one type of people, but it's not. It's in the Turks. It's actually a lineage that actually is found highly in the Turks. It was even found in some of the Phoenicians, which is even obviously because the Phoenicians, that area was invaded by people of the north, which we know when we look at that genetic, the little information on that. So that's why we're looking at this. We're looking at this because it's really interesting to see how the J came there and invaded them and got in this area. Very, very interesting to see those things. So you can look at these different places and everything and get a clear look at some of these things because, it's really interesting to see. It's really interesting to see. So seeing these things, obviously, you can't take it at face value. You got to do the research yourself and see these things. And that's why we're talking about these things, because these types of things are worth talking about. I think these types of claims that say if this is Israel or not, I think is worth talking about and examining. I think these things are worth talking about and examining. So that's why I wanted to see that. So that J lineage is actually Turks. It's actually going to be a Turkish lineage that came up from the north. So really interesting, really interesting. So I just want to open some branches and look at those things and whatnot. It's just a simple day today. So with that, family, I think we're gonna get back to some prophecy, have some holy conversation on some prophecies, get on some deep topics and everything. But this is really interesting. This has been a very interesting month. I devoted these few months on studying this to see, get a deeper understanding of the prophecies and get a deeper understanding of the Bible and history. So it's been one. It's been a very interesting one, like I say. So with that, family, everything that we did today was just, examining things. So with that, be blessed, be beloved.